I'm going to begin by throwing a few numbers at you. Many of us have heard about the voluntourism industry, where individuals go to another country with often the very pure intentions of improving the lives of the local citizens. A 1 to 2 week short-term mission trip to a country outside of our own can cost upwards of $2,000 to $3,000 for just one individual. $850 is the median, so not the average, but the middle annual income of all adult individuals across the globe. Now, I would bet my own savings that a decent portion of you here tonight have that amount in your bank account right now. What would it look like if the money we spent on a short-term mission trip were instead instilled directly into a community through resources or into the hands of struggling guardians, healthcare professionals, and educators? 1.5 million is the number of nonprofit organizations in the United States right now. Almost all of these organizations are constantly seeking external funding from donors, but not always seeking volunteer help. Volunteering can look like the donation of your efforts, resources, and most importantly, your time. So why are nonprofit organizations not seeking volunteer help? Well, 1% is the very small percentage of individuals that Lee Schulman, co-founder of an Argentine NGO, says are actually qualified to volunteer. I don't mention these numbers to discourage volunteering. Rather, I mention these numbers because my hope is to challenge your perspective on how to serve and how to go into all of your future service endeavors informed, responsibly, sustainably, and intentionally, to become part of the 1% who knows what you're doing. Now, these data points and my mission tonight segue into the premise of Courtney Martin's article, The Reductive Seduction of Other People's Problems. In summary, this article suggests that the further we are from an issue, the easier it seems to solve that problem, regardless of if we know enough about it. Service here, and especially abroad, has become increasingly trendy, but as a result, we are frequently guilty of attempting to solve problems for the impacted people, not with them and the knowledge they possess about their own problem. Martin says, if you're young, privileged, and interested in creating a life of meaning, of course, you'd be attracted to solving problems that seem urgent and readily solvable. So while these intentions are very infrequently malicious, they can be reckless. The intent of service for many of us is to fix what's broken. Maybe we should approach service the same way we do any problem. Research first. Because tonight, I pose that service without knowledge is vandalism, not value. My much larger lesson about service actually began with Martin's article, as it was assigned to me before my own first service experience abroad. In April of 2019, I was invited on a catalyst trip to Uganda. 20 high schoolers, including myself, raised funds and supplies and were planted in nonprofit organizations across the country to learn and observe not only what these organizations and how they impacted the communities, but also where our own callings and service may lie. We yearned to grow just enough roots to be picked up and replanted back in the States, to make some more tangible changes a little closer to home. We visited orphanages in Kampala, served in deeply impoverished communities in the bush of East Africa, and led programs at international schools across the region. But the experience that stands out to me the most is at an organization that provides treatment to Ugandan citizens from jiggers, a parasitic insect that attacks the sole of the foot. They cause open sores that can be susceptible to infection and disease and make it difficult for individuals to take the journeys necessary to access food, water, or education. At a service day at this organization, it was my job to keep track of where in each individual's foot the jiggers had nested. Now, some of the children we served made it through this period of their life with only a few jiggers in their feet. Others were not as fortunate. I stayed late to comfort a 6-year-old boy who had dozens of open sores in the bottom of his feet caused by miles walked barefoot, inadequate access to soap and clean water, and the effects of a very short lifetime of abject poverty. After holding myself together for the entire day, I selfishly took a break in the adjacent fields, and I remember falling to my knees, sobbing at the ignorance that had been seeping out of my body. How had I not known that this was an issue? And what could I do now that I did? Well, prior to this service trip, our group had created dozens of pairs of denim shoes made out of discarded jeans. And we packed each of them in a gallon Ziploc bag with care instructions. And as each child left the clinic, we provided them with one of these packages. But as the nurses began to close up shop, the orange glow from the setting sun illuminated little piles of denim shoes still in their Ziploc bags, scattered among the low brush. The exact numbers I do not know, but what I do know is that a decent portion of the shoes that we had put together never went home with their intended owners. In fact, many of the children we served chose to go home empty-handed. So here's the lesson that I learned, 3 of them. Did this organization quite literally help Ugandan citizens back on their feet? Yes. Did the structure of traveling pop-up shop clinic staffed by local Ugandan nurses have an incredible impact on the local community? Yes. And they continue to do incredible work. Did all of the shoes that we put together go home with their intended owners? No. And it is my opinion today that we did not ask enough questions. How many children are we going to be serving, and what are their sizes? Is wearing denim shoes a telltale sign of poverty, and that's embarrassing? Do they hold up in both the thick red dust of Kampala and the wet muds of the lower country? It was undoubtedly powerful to have spent this hour with the young boy who braved such excruciating conditions. I remember him frequently and fondly. But this experience was my first brush with ignorance. We could have served him better, but we didn't ask questions. Now, my experience in Uganda definitely started to shape the way that I perceived service. And so knowing that service required asking questions, I began asking so many of them. And upon arriving at the University of Georgia to study nonprofit management, I did a deep research dive on the city of Athens and discovered the glaring poverty and resource disparity that this city and its inhabitants endure. And this led me to serve the growing homeless population here in Athens. With friends, I raised funds to put together care packages that we hoped to hand out to the community downtown. But I knew we had to ask questions, and so prior, we did laps of downtown, striking up conversations with folks who had hit hard times. And we asked questions, and we got answers. We gained insight. I got to know people, and they got to know me. And so, coming back to downtown, armed with bagged lunches, I was so sure that the insight that I had gained was going to help me perfectly serve an underserved population. Instead, what I found was another issue. I had definitely asked questions, but I had struggled to listen. In the dozens of conversations I had with these folks, they said things like, "It's great to have gum when toothbrushes aren't available," or "When it's wet outside, it's good to have some individually wrapped snacks," or "If I stay in an area for very long at all, it's good to have some protein to pack away." And so I gathered what I had heard: gum, snacks, and protein. Here's what I missed. Oftentimes, toothbrushes aren't available. These folks are frequently wet and are in need of ponchos. And if they don't stay in an area for very long at all, how will the protein that we purchased ever make it to the intended recipient? Consequently, my refusal to truly listen came to light as we returned downtown. Pretty soon, I was laden with plastic bins full of half-claimed lunches. The bologna going warm, and the hot coffee going cold. In Uganda, I had a momentous experience that taught me to ask questions. But believe it or not, it was right here in the classic city that I learned to listen to those answers. So now, I had two tools in my service tool belt: asking and listening. So what came next? Well, hooked on serving the local community, I began to turn my focus towards the University of Georgia campus. According to the New York Times, only 3.8% of the UGA student body falls in the bottom 20% of annual family income. And while this volume may seem small, this amount of people could actually fill our largest freshman hall, a 10-story high-rise dormitory that houses over 1,000 students twice over. But at a university more systematically wealthy than others across the Southeast, attention to assistance like food pantries can be lower than other programs. So, educated by the student leaders before me and supported by UGA's fantastic faculty, staff, and Student Government Association, a team of students led the charge in creating the university's first fresh produce food pantry, Fresh Express. Thus far, it's been a complicated process, but a successful one. Nothing truly has taught me more than the formation of Fresh Express, and I can tell you exactly why. Because for the first time in my entire service career, I was challenged not just to ask, not just to listen, but to respond. Now, this lesson began the very first day we started to serve students. I remember my hands shaking on the large handles of the glass doors. My team had secured an array of non-perishables and produce, and we were so eager and ready to serve students with pasta and rice and beans and bell peppers and okra, and we were just raring to go. But that first day, not one student showed up. And that first week, less than 10 stopped by. Oh, I was crushed. And I remember sitting in my car after another afternoon of nothing and thinking to myself, why? I wondered if I had asked, yeah, and I pondered if I had listened. I had an epiphany. And the next morning, my team and I immediately got to work. Here were the questions that we pushed out on a post-visit survey. How did you hear about us? What would you like to see more of? And what obstacles have you encountered in accessing fresh produce? So our numbers at first were pretty small, but the data we received was invaluable. We immediately began making changes to when we were open, how and where we communicated with students, and pretty soon, our inventory started to reflect that. In the weeks following, we quadrupled the number of students we served. I have never seen okra fly so fast off the shelves. And so knowing that we could be so informed, we sent out another survey. We had 3 more questions. How difficult is it for you to find fresh food? What kinds of fresh food fit best in your diet? And my personal favorite question, what tastes like home? So through trial and error, including a 4-week stint where I almost exclusively ate collard greens to keep them from going to the compost, Fresh Express has blossomed into an introspective organization, albeit imperfect. But I argue that that's service. You can't always get it right. But when you ask, listen, and respond, you can serve a fellow human being in the way they actually need, not just in the way you assume they need. I tell these 3 stories to hammer out what it means to be informed in service. You can't just ask. You cannot just listen, but rather you must ask, listen, and respond to round out what I like to call informed altruism. In the day-to-day way of how we understand altruism, it's giving or doing something without expecting anything in return. But when it comes to service, we should adhere to the more zoological definition of altruism: behavior of an animal that benefits another at its own expense. At its own expense. If service feels easy, it's likely that we're doing it wrong. I want to round out tonight by coming back full circle to Courtney Martin's article. She introduces 3 mottos that I live by and hope to continue to live by. 1, don't serve because you've fallen in love with solvability. Serve because you've fallen in love with complexity. 2, don't serve because you want to do something virtuous. Serve because you want to do something difficult. And don't serve because you want to talk. Serve because you want to listen. You have the tools right now to start positively impacting every single person you serve. Passion and an intent to do something good is such a fantastic place to start, and it is not enough. Digging and seeking and listening and asking and responding with compassion and a willingness to earnestly learn takes humility, integrity, and sometimes a mind-boggling amount of time. But that's how we do it right. It is exhausting. It's exhausting. And it is the most fulfilling thing any human can do for another. It's not just about progress. It's about the process. Thank you.